Greetings. Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Colin Renk. Colin is involved in the American China Society of Indiana, and today he shares with us a bit about what that organization is and what it does, and some of the challenges and opportunities available to Hoosier businesses that are looking to interact with China and also potentially bring some Chinese investments to the state. Colin, thanks for being here.
No, happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, great. So kind of start us off, I guess. Can you tell us a little bit about what the American China Society of Indiana is and kind of what its role serves?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And what's sort of interesting is, our name, American China Society of Indiana, can be very ambiguous sometimes, but ostensibly we are a chamber of commerce between Indiana and China. So we're bilateral, nonprofit membership-based organization. So we want to help, Chinese companies find opportunities to do business with Indiana, but also helping Indiana companies do business with China.
Great. What are some of the kind of benefits for the states or the businesses kind of having an organization like yours around?
Yeah. So maybe what I'll do is I'll first give kind of a brief overview and history of ACSI. So we were founded in pretty much 2011 by then chairman of Telemon Corporation, which is Albert Chen. And really what he foresaw was, back in the 1980s, there was this huge wave of Japanese investment coming into Indiana. And, we saw a lot of benefits from that. And I think Indiana is still the number one per capita destination for Japanese investment. So a lot of people were looking at China as being kind of that next wave of investment. So our organization was founded in a similar vein as the Japan America Society of Indiana. Therefore, that's why you kind of get that name. Where they're more focused also on education and culture. We're a very business-focused organization. And so, part of the value of having kind of these country-specific groups, there's one for Japan and then one with India as well, is to create that foundational level relationship. So, what we've seen, I joined the organization at the tail end of 2012, is as, different elected officials move in and out, or economic development officials, a lot of those relationships tend to be kind of left with whoever the personnel was at the time. A good example was there was a city in Indiana that had a delegation from China in 2015, and then the mayor at the time said, "Oh, you're welcome to come back anytime you want." The next year in 2016, they show up, and then that mayor didn't run for re-election again. So now new mayor is saying, "Oh, what's going on? We're not familiar with these people." So that's where we can come in and kind of give that foundational level structure of, who these people were, and kind of keep track of folks that are coming in and out. And then the other side to this too is just, as kind of the global economy, kicks off and more, Indiana SMEs are looking at international opportunities, it can be scary sometimes. You see kind of this big, ominous opportunity, China, that can be very daunting for some companies. So what's been helpful is to have someone that's, objective and impartial to be able to provide that guidance. And what's sort of interesting is, given 2016, we have a new Trump administration coming in, which kind of changed a lot of that in terms of the dialogue with China. There were more questions than ever about, how to do business. And I think, a bit the complexity of being in the information age, there's also a level of disinformation in the information age. And, we had a lot of companies, call us and say, "Well, we heard that, President Trump said that China pays the tariff. So we, imported a lot of new machinery in from China, and now Customs and Border Patrol says that we pay the tariffs." So it's like, yeah, it can be troublesome for people. So, we, really align ourselves to be that impartial, objective, broker, if you will. We don't have any sort of like business services with it. So it's not like we have any vested stake in anything. And, we're non-political. Our job is not to convince you that China is the best place to do business. Our job is to make sure that you, do your homework, you're, tapped into the right resources so that you can, make the most beneficial decision for your company.
Yeah, kind of speaking of some of those resources, can you give an example of what some of those might be for a business that is looking to export and learn a bit more about China?
Yeah, well, it's I always tout about doing your homework, and there's not necessarily a right answer for a lot of people. So, I'll have companies reach out and say, what's the best place for me to do business in China? It's like, well, it depends. If you are looking at, creating a white collar office in China for sales and marketing, obviously, going into one of the bigger cities. If you're looking at trying to do manufacturing or, depending on the industry, it might make more sense for you to go to a different province. So there's not necessarily one, resource. It's more about trying to be accountable and do your homework, as much of your homework as possible beforehand. And so I guess that's a natural plug for get involved with ACSI, right? But, to be honest, I think one of the things that we've seen a lot of historically has been kind of the silo treatment that a lot of Indiana companies have, especially when it's doing business internationally. So you have these kind of mega corporations like Cummins and Eli Lilly. To be honest, they don't need our help, right? They don't need our help navigating China. Eli Lilly's been there since 1917. So they've survived the end of World War I, World War II, Cultural Revolution. Like this is nothing to them, in terms of the trade war. But there's a lot of smaller businesses, that really could use the help. And a lot of it has been more of this, just having these dialogues to have a better sense of, okay, well, what makes the most sense for you? So, a lot of times it's just, picking up the phone or in this day and age, doing Zoom conferences to try and understand, oh, did you realize that we have a foreign trade zone here? Or do you have, the resources from CIBER? So a lot of it is kind of this plug and play, kind of depository of information. And, if I don't have the answer, I know someone who does. And, really what we saw was, back in, kind of the beginning stages of the trade war, we kind of reconvened and repositioned ourselves to be that conduit for, kind of all things business. So, we redesigned, a lot of our marketing material and, email distributions to make sure that we provided the most objective advice given the dynamic, changing environment. We can get a tweet that comes out right now as we're doing this interview and find out that things have completely changed. So, helping make sure that Hoosiers are plugged into the right sets of information. So whether it's legal, whether it's accounting or banking or visas, we try to be lean and responsive to the unique needs that everyone has.
Yeah, and kind of your point, it's a hard question to answer, right? Like, oh, where should I go in China? Well, China is a fairly large country with a pretty huge population. It's kind of like, hey, where should I do business in Indiana? Well, there's there's the major cities and economic areas. There's the rural areas. What makes the most sense, for you individually, right? And that's there isn't a one-stop solution for everything, and so it is kind of taking that individualized approach to the businesses and kind of what they're looking for. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think another kind of thought that kind of spurred in my mind too, as we were talking, is, especially with exporting, but really with China as well, right? The last 4 years have been just kind of all over the place, from expectations and ever changing, conversations and tones. And that's why I think it is important to know about, organizations like yours, that are available, that can help walk you through that process, so that you're not just listening to the news. Oh, China's paying for the tariffs. Well, what does that actually look like in reality? And what do these changes mean? And it's not a, no, we don't want to do business, but what are the adjustments? What's that look like individually for you? What are those impacts? And try to navigate what still hopefully makes the most sense for your situation.
Yeah. And, I think that's been the biggest issue, because there are still a lot of structural barriers when it comes to doing business, with China. So, we obviously have, the US and China are the two largest economies, but there are definitely barriers for, whether it's Chinese FDI, coming into Indiana, or Indiana companies looking to go set up shop in in China. But, so what we've been doing is, I sort of hate these like marketing plugs, but when other people have taken a step back from China, we're trying to take a step forward and making sure that we clearly articulate, these structural issues, because, there are other kind of Chinese chambers of commerce throughout the, nation, or even in China, that kind of paint these rosy pictures of everything is great, everything is fine, but it's not. Let's be honest about it. It's not. And but there are still opportunities there. And it still makes sense for, certain companies to look at China. Again, it's their middle class, purchasing power is increasing like crazy. Their middle class, I think, now has a higher population than the entire United States, and the demand for American goods is still high. But, rather than kind of, avoiding that elephant in the room, we're kind of the ones that objectively talk about it. And actually next month, on October 26th, we're going to be doing our annual China Business Conference, which literally talks about all of these things. And so, ultimately, our mantra is really to try and, obviously do what's right for Indiana, but, help our companies understand the risks of doing business with China, and then also the opportunities, because, again, as there's been a lot of people pulling out of China, there's still, ample opportunity to navigate in there.
Yeah, I mean, especially given the last 2 years. So, you're going from, the Trump administration and kind of the trade war and the tariffs and kind of that whole conversation. And then, just, a couple years later, here's the pandemic, and, doing a lot of these conversations throughout the pandemic. And, we work in international business anyway, but so we can have that perspective. But it really does seem that these situations continue to highlight, everything is, it really is kind of a global economy, whether you think it is or not, between, where the money's going and coming in from, and supply chains, and, it's all a lot tighter and interconnected.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, I think, we've kind of skirted around this issue, but, there's obviously political issues, between the two countries as well. And, I think more than anything is we don't want people to be dissuaded by, I don't want to necessarily call it propaganda, but just, misinformation, and make sure that people are using rational decision-making when it comes to doing business internationally. But yeah, no, I mean, it's been challenging times, but what's sort of interesting is, obviously Chinese foreign direct investment kind of across the board has been down, given everything. But, on Thursday, there's going to be a ribbon cutting for a new Chinese facility in Jeffersonville. So, there's still opportunities for people to navigate. And, even on the trade side, during 2020, despite a pandemic, despite, a trade war and everything, Indiana's exports to China actually went up. And according to the US-China Business Council, it went up 56%. Making Indiana the 5th largest trading partner to China among all US states. And, I think we take, at ACSI, and really kind of holistically take great pride in that, because, since we were founded in 2011, Indiana's exports to China have grown, I think, 88% across the board, whereas Indiana's exports to the rest of the world have only grown 3%. So, there's, from a bilateral perspective, there's still a lot of opportunity for, Indiana companies to sell their goods, to a hungry China that wants American branded stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this really highlights, for our perspective, is so much of it is, can you mention before, the relationship building, and, being able to have those kind of candid, less formal, just informational conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always sort of hate those reactive phone calls. It's like I get a phone call from someone saying, "Oh no, I made a huge mistake in China. Can you help solve everything?" And, obviously we'll do everything that we can to help those companies, but, we always, try and be as proactive as possible and kind of nip issues in the bud. And it's not necessarily just, like China's a scary place or anything negative, but it's just, doing business internationally. If you're going to go to Poland, you're going to need help, whether it's translating materials or just understanding the lay of the land. So, I think obviously there's still a lot of opportunity there, but it's just, again, trying to make sure that you, one, do your homework, but then are also making rational decisions, not necessarily based on fear or, just, kind of crystal ball gazing. Let's actually look at the facts first and foremost.
Well, and especially having, kind of the breadth of experience and kind of that longer view and relationship that you all have, right? You're kind of in a better position to sparse through what is this rhetoric that's coming out right now. Well, this is really how that typically translates into reality, or, you don't necessarily need to worry about that, even though you might have read it, heard it, kind of whatever, right?
Yeah. And, I think, more historically, we would get a lot of economic developers or other companies be like, well, we want a business to come to China, or sorry, a business from China to come to Indiana. Can you help us? It's like, of course, we'll do everything that we can. But the strongest asset that you can build is a relationship. First and foremost, it's not necessarily a transactional. You need to have X amount of money moving here in 12 months, and that's actually paved quite good dividends. So since 1987, Indiana's had a sister state relationship with Zhejiang province. And Zhejiang, as of today, is probably the #1 province in terms of, overall productivity and GDP, aside from kind of the main capitals. So it's a hot center. And, I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of our economy, a growing tech sector, very strong, manufacturing. And so we've had a lot of companies from Zhejiang look at Indiana specifically because of that. And, one of my favorite stories is I was actually meeting with another potential company in northern Indiana, and I get a phone call from my office saying, there are some Chinese people here to meet with you. Like, oh, okay. I didn't realize I had a meeting. I checked my email, I checked my WeChat, and I hadn't received anything. And so, I give them a quick call. They're like, yeah, no problem. You can just meet us tomorrow. And so the next day I went to the Radisson by the airport to have a lovely, motel coffee and, exchange some of the pleasantries. And I finally said, so tell me, why are you here? They're like, well, we are looking at opening a distribution center, first time in North America. And we thought we should come here. And so if you can help me find a lawyer, a banker, an accountant, and a warehouse by the end of the week, that would be great. Like, what? Like, that's kind of a lot. And you've already made this decision. Like, why? How? They're like, well, we're from Hangzhou, which is the capital of Zhejiang. And so we thought Indianapolis, which is the capital of Indiana, would be a great place for us to get started. And that's how they decided to come here. So a lot of it is about those relationships. And as if you were a Hoosier going to move out to China, would you rather go to somewhere that has a strong Hoosier population and connection to Indiana and Americans, or would you rather go to somewhere where you have no connection to and they have no connection to you? So from a kind of a business sense, it's kind of a little bit safe and less risky to move somewhere where there's been a proven track record of success.
Yeah, and like you said, kind of that a little bit more of a commonality and history, right? It's not just there is some of that established relationships, whatever minor. I kind of found like even if it's a minor one, that goes a long way to kind of smooth over some of those initial misgivings or questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Kind of wrapping it up a little bit, do you have any just again like practical advice or kind of what resources or kind of if a business was thinking about, hey, I would kind of like to get started in China or at least explore that opportunity, obviously reaching out to you would be a great start, but kind of what are some of those practical tips or some of the homework items that you mentioned that they could get started with?
Well, first is, just tap into as many free resources as possible. So obviously, between CIBER and ACSI and, different partners like US Commercial Service or, even just economic development people, just to, again, evaluate kind of that lay of the land and try to make sure, does this make, business sense for me right now? I think the trickiest part right now is if you haven't been doing anything international and you're looking to go to China as your first kind of dipping your big toe into the water, that may not make the most sense right now, just given things are, still changing. It's still kind of a weird time for all of that. But what's been sort of interesting is we did a poll, some of our members and just other companies that we've worked with over the years. And surprisingly, it was more than 80% said that China is still, a priority for them. So, whether you're small, medium, or large, there's still money to be made and still a lot of business for there. But the mechanism in which you kind of do business is changing all the time. So, part of the rationale for a lot of the tariffs is to try and localize as much business as possible. So, if you are a Chinese company and you're looking to come into the North American market, if you were to manufacture in China, then bring it over here, you have to pay tariffs on that. But if you set up a factory in the United States, and it's for the United States, then you don't really have to pay tariffs on that, right? So part of it has been to try and incentivize localization. But on the other side to that, of that coin is, if you are an Indiana company that, there's one off the top of my head that manufactures, or I should say sources, the majority of their raw materials from China, brings it to Indiana, and then about 60% of their customers are back in China. That it's situations like that which are much more difficult to justify from a business decision now, because now you're getting hit twice with tariffs. So, I think the best advice that I could give to people is, one, do your homework, two, think creatively, and then also, understand that, we don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs. We don't know. I mean, they could go away next week. They could be permanent. So it's making sure that you are evaluating all of your options, but also understand your level of risk that you want. Because even 5 to 10 years ago, when companies are looking at establishing factories in China, intellectual property was still an issue at the time. And so, it's again, that cost benefit analysis that every company needs to do on an individual basis to see, does it make sense for us to go to China if there might be concerns about intellectual property, leaking out. But then, again, that's what we're here for. And, we are kind of that objective guidance group that can connect you to the right, personnel and partners, whether it's legal, accounting, et cetera, or just to be able to provide, sounding off board. Well, we're thinking about doing this. Do you think that makes sense, or could you give us some guidance? Just to be able to have that asset in our community, I think has really been really valuable for some of these companies that, again, you just go on any sort of mainstream media and you can be confused with, what's going on.
Sure.
But to be able to, again, separate a lot of the noise and the fiction away from the fact, I think is the best thing that you can do right now.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot too from a business perspective, having somebody that can help you connect to, banks or financial institutions or lawyers, the experts that in their field, but also have experience working.
Oh, for sure.
Abroad as well. So
well, and I think that's part of the the overall guidance, and I've sort of seen this historically, not in every case, but we have this kind of Hoosier hospitality among people in Indiana. We're very welcoming, and we try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but kind of what comes with that is this level of Hoosier naivety, right? So another story is there's an Indiana company that is opening their factory in China for the first time, and rather than again, kind of doing their homework and trying to set things up right for the first time, they wanted to go to the cheap routes and use a cheap lawyer to draft all their materials and contracts and things like that. Well, this lawyer who has no international experience forgets that US dollars is not the common fiat when it comes to doing business internationally. And instead of promising to invest $2.6 million, they ended up promising 12.5 because they forgot that RMB and US dollars are not the same. So it's just like things like this where, you always have to evaluate the cost benefit of everything. And, I think sometimes people, want to give the benefit of the doubt, or they're, we'll trust this guy. This guy seems nice, or, rather than paying a lot of money up front to be successful and stable for 30 years, let's do it cheap. And then if we have to redo it all in 12 months, we'll just redo it all. Those are the types of decisions that we try and dissuade people from making. It can be a hard proposition to sell that, you will be more successful if you do your homework now, that if you invest time, money, and energy into setting up the right way rather than the cheap way. And I sort of hate saying this, but I think the trade war has actually been a blessing in that regard, because a lot of times, entrepreneurs or small companies, they look at China and their kind of eyes lighten up, and there's so much money to be made. We got to get there now. And so part of this pause has been helpful, because it's also helped them pause and realize, okay, well, does it make sense at this time, or how am I going to have to navigate all of this? It's forced a lot of companies to actually take stock of the current situation rather than just let's get that factory up and running.
Right. Well, I think some of that goes a long way too for, your host country as well. It's like, oh, you didn't just do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Like you've taken the time, you've talked to the people, you've spent the money up front to do the proper paperwork and have it vested by people that actually know the terminology and know what's going on, right? And that's one thing we've seen time and time again is like doing that bit of homework, reaching out to organizations like yours, showing that you have done a little bit of that legwork goes so much further than just showing up like, hey, we're here and we have a bunch of money that we want to invest in the community. It's like, well, great. Did you do any of that legwork up beforehand that makes that that conversation smoother?
Yeah, and as you see it too, this is not just a China thing, right? If you're going to go do business anywhere in the world, you really need to do your homework. And just China as an example, there's a lot of regulation and jurisdiction at the local level, much more than the U.S. system. So understanding that you have to do a lot more. I don't want to say negotiation, but more just like contracts and waiting around for different regulators on the local level can be problematic. But it's the same thing with doing business in Germany or Africa or other places in South Asia, that there's different ways of doing business and there's different levels of government and bureaucracy and regulation that you have to go through. So rather than just try and go through it as quick as possible and then get fined a bunch, it makes sense to take your time and make sure that you're doing it the proper way.
Yeah, and that also helps kind of prevent some of those unseen costs or circumstances where, oh, I did this super cheap and here we are. Well, here's the laundry list of things that you didn't know that you now have to pay for. Oh, and this kind of falls out the bottom and then kind of leaves a sour taste. And it's like, well, this is why you talk to,
that's right,
American China Society of Indiana to help mitigate some of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, Colin, thanks again for taking some time today and chatting a little bit about your organization and kind of what those opportunities and can look like for our Hoosiers.
Yeah, no, glad to be here and hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. For future suggestions on topics or comments, please drop us a line at cyber@indiana.edu.